Beep, beep. Your hands. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. I don't think we're gonna have a big crowd this evening. First item on the agenda, review and approval of the minutes from the prior meeting. If anybody has any additions or changes, if they'd be kind enough to share them. Otherwise, I'd look for a motion to approve the minutes, please.
I'll make a motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Takes care of the minutes. Can we handle the public hearing as a single public hearing tonight, or do we need to break it down into two sections?
We can do a single public hearing.
Okay, I don't think we're gonna hear a lot from the public, if you don't mind me speculating a little bit. But the next item on the agenda is a public hearing for a couple of zoning amendments. The first is the minimum lot area, the second is the minimum right-of-way distance. If you wanna start us off, Ian?
Yeah, so I'll just give a little background here to get us all up to speed. But back at our March meeting, we had the public hearing to consider the preliminary plat of the Oscar Meadows second subdivision by Bigelow Homes. And at that meeting, it was discovered that several of the lots, or rather 12 out of the 41 lots, were under the minimum lot size requirement specified in our code, which is 8,000 square feet for single-family detached dwellings. And as a result of that meeting, the developer was directed to fix the lot sizes, which took some time for them to do, but in doing so, they found that in order to make the lots meet that 8,000 square foot minimum size, that they would like to ask the city for a subdivision variance, which would have reduced the right-of-way distance down from 66 feet to 60 feet. But the right-of-way distance, remember, includes anything between the property lines. So it's the sidewalk, the boulevard, the curb and gutter, and the actual driving lane. So they weren't proposing to reduce this distance of the actual driving lanes. It would have come from the boulevard area itself, so down to 5.5 feet instead of 8.5 feet. So because the subdivision variance requires a public hearing, the Planning Commission meeting held that as well. But the Planning Commission tabled action on that item because they wanted staff to do some research and see if we could potentially change our code to either reduce the minimum lot size for single-family homes or reduce the code specification for right-of-way distance. And so you'll see in the memo that I had sent out with the packet, just some of the research that staff had done of some of the other cities in our region. And so you can see for minimum lot size, there's quite a pretty substantial range. Anything between 4,500 square feet on the small end all the way up to 11,000 on the high end. So pretty substantial range. And then for the right-of-way distance, most were either 60 feet or 66 feet for the type of road that was proposed, right-of-way that was proposed to be reduced in their subdivision variance request. So ultimately, staff would support a reduction in the lot size, minimum lot size requirements. I think based on what we've seen in other cities, we could reduce that square footage down to 7,200 in that area. And in doing so, Bigelow Homes wouldn't need to be approved for their subdivision variance if the city council were to approve reducing the minimum lot size. And with the right-of-way distance, staff isn't recommending a change to that requirement at this time. We just feel that having that 66-foot right-of-way still allows for adequate space for infrastructure and maintenance and all of that. So that's what we came up with. If there's any questions before we open the public hearing, I can take those.
How did you come up with 7,200 square feet?
Well, let's see. 7,200 square feet is one of the standards in Byron and in Caledonia. Really just landed at a number. They could have done like 7,500 as well. But 7,200 just seemed like a good size to me.
Fit within the overall averages of what you were seeing in other cities?
Yeah, I'd say so.
And this would only affect our R1 zoning district, correct?
Well, it would be anywhere where single-family homes are allowed, so it could be, R1 or R2. Yeah. Because the minimum lot size is guided more by what the actual use is rather than the zoning district.
Yeah, so, I just ran the calculator here. Our R1 zoning is 4 maximum per acre, right? Is that,
That's the density requirement that comes from our comprehensive plan, so, but for low-density residential, the range for that is like 4 or less units per gross acre.
right, which includes the roads and
Yeah, yep.
parks and everything else from the plat, so, our previous 8,000 requirement, again, assuming there's no roads or anything accounted for, is 5.4, and we'd be going to, at 7,200, we'd be going to 6. So, it doesn't really allow developers to get too much denser anyway, because they'd be pushing up against the 4.0 requirement anyway, that they'd be held to for overall density. So even if they put the houses closest together, they'd still have to have more green space or open space somewhere else.
I guess that was my biggest question, was how does that affect our density standards, being that we basically just told a developer that's across the street from this development that he had to completely redo all of his stuff and cut housing because he didn't meet the density by 0.01%. or
Right,
whatever.
so the density guidelines are still in place, so like what Paul was saying, even if you design all your lots so they're exactly 7,200, you're still gonna have to meet that density requirement of 4 units or less per acre to be considered low density. Let's see. And of course, just because you have a minimum doesn't mean you have to design it smaller. You can always do 8,000 or whatever bigger, yeah.
But if I was a developer, you're gonna try to squeeze every penny you can out of an opportunity.
Right, yeah, yep.
So I guess my only next question, would be kind of just more for just straight discussion, but what happens when Bigelow comes with the next development and it's not 7,200 square feet they're looking for, it's 7,000? Are we gonna change our ordinances to please them again when the next subdivision doesn't work in their favor, or I guess that would be
That's where my head's at too, because
my biggest kind of pushback,
their
I
proposal
guess.
from March is exactly the same as this. They never had a proposal with any other size lots. They squeezed another lot on, each side of the street.
I mean, if you wanna, we should probably go through the public hearing process, even though there isn't much of a public hearing before we get into a discussion, but we don't have to do this. If we want Mr. Bigelow's project to stand as is, there's always the option to go through a subdivision variance. And I guess the discussion at the last meeting was, is that the best fix for the challenge? So that's, at least in my mind, how this discussion kind of got started. The last meeting was a little skinny, there weren't a lot of voices. Okay.
I believe you.
I saw it.
Not trying to beat anybody up, I'm
Yep.
just saying, when there's 4 of
Yep.
us here, and
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, we can go through that process first if you wanna do that.
Sure.
Before we have any further discussion, I guess.
for the sake of formality, I will both open and close the public hearing. Thank you for the feedback. So, for the sake of formality. So I hate variances. We've never done a subdivision variance as a city, or at least not to my recollection, over the last 15 years.
Sure.
But if that is the best fix to the problem, by all means, I'm happy to entertain that discussion. If there is some value at looking all the projects in town, both current and future, and saying, hey, a smaller lot size offers a benefit, I'm very much willing to have that conversation as well.
You know, Ian, when you were looking at some of this, you know, I'm just gonna take Byron, 'cause it's the first one you've got there. You know, they've got their R1 is 7,200 and their R2 is 6,000. Do you know how they classify, like, what those differences are?
I should have taken better notes on that. Let's see. But when I was doing the research, I was looking at, like, what I thought would be similar enough to what R1 and R2 would be, and just, like, zoning districts that would allow for single-family homes. But, you know, for, like, some of these...
'Cause I see, like, I mean, and then just the very next one, you know, Caledonia down there, you know, obviously has the, you know, the larger one. You know, I mean, we've got quite a few subdivisions, you know,
Right.
out there as well that are larger type lot, you know, I mean, and I understand that if we have a 7,200, that's, like you said, that's just the minimum. They can make it bigger if they want, you know. But do we look at having a separate, you know, separate kind of mark, you know, for some of those larger ones, and be able to tunnel some of those subdivisions to some different, you know, or were we just making more work for Ian? Who's clearly got enough to...
Well, yeah, that's a fair point. Like Caledonia, for example, they have their R1 suburban residential and R2 urban residential. I haven't been to Caledonia exactly, but I would guess their urban versus suburban Caledonia is maybe not quite what we would see in Casson area. I don't know that we would have like an equivalent like suburban residential that maybe they would have in Caledonia.
Maybe I just need some clarity, but
Sure.
even though we dropped this number, they still can't put more than 4 on an acre anyways. Is that what you're correct?
Right.
Right. So, what does it matter? Is that extra piece out of every lot, can that be allotted to a piece of park that would have been used for a house anyways? I guess I'm not seeing the relevance.
Well, changing the lot size would go well beyond the scope of Tony's project, Mr. Bigelow's project. I mean, this would affect all future development within the town in terms of smaller.
I get that.
But we're, at least in my mind, yeah, I don't want to necessarily change the code for a single person. I'm trying to look for, you know, is this the best direction for the development of Casson going forward?
Right. Start a precedent, then you...
Yeah. It is so minor, I don't know if I could quantify the benefit in between my own ears.
Right.
And I don't remember, so the deal that we did on Second Street for Janice Borgstrom, over there, when we had the one lot was too big, the other lot was too small. Did we just change the lot size on the one, but I thought we had to make an exception for the one lot because it was still too small? Do you remember that, Ian?
Well, that one, Ms. Borgstrom actually ended up withdrawing her application because the issue was that it was like an older part of town, and the existing house was like built pretty much like right up to the property
The
line.
house was too big and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the concern was like, well, how does that existing homeowner like maintain that side of their house if someone else is going to own that property now?
But we adjusted that lot line, and in doing so, it made that other lot too small.
That was what the request was, but then they ended up withdrawing it in favor of putting like a access easement
Okay.
on that side, so they didn't have to get approved for the
We
subdivision
didn't
variance.
technically have to change that.
For some reason, I thought we said, no, guys need to go back and find a better solution, and that may have been.
And the better solution was that access agreement, yeah.
Yeah. But that's my memory, which is
Yep.
prone to flaws.
Yep.
I just wanna add in here, that, again, the way I think of it is that we've got a density requirement that, again, ultimately is going to take this 40-acre lot or whatever and set a maximum. And if we shrink the lot size a little bit, I think that gives the developers, because they can't add more houses than that requirement anyway, but it gives them more leeway into where they can put roads and what size certain lots are, right? Like, in this particular example, they can make the lots in this little circle or this rectangle here smaller and make the other lots bigger. But I think ultimately, you know, at some point, they're not gonna wanna keep going smaller because they just won't be able to sell the houses for as much, because people will stop, you know, they won't wanna buy a house where they're able to reach their neighbor's house, right, out their window. So, I think that the smaller lot size, considering we are keeping our density requirement, is just gonna give the developers more freedom to make things fit inside the spaces that we have available to work with. And in this case obviously there's a lot of stuff they're avoiding. You can see over on the west-hand side, there's a huge, I don't know, quite a lot of acres that aren't getting touched at all because they just physically can't. Which is why they're kinda squeezing in all the houses on the eastern side. I'm not exactly sure why they left Outlaw G completely empty, but, I mean, that's another, you know, it's at least probably an acre there, maybe more, that's just gonna be open space, green space, I guess you could call it. So, I guess I would say is, I'm on board to shrinking it up and just allowing more freedom for the developers to do what they can inside the space they have, as long as, you know, we're not changing our density requirements, which we're not, so.
So essentially, it doesn't matter one way or another, if we change it or we don't, but it's the precedent that's the major factor.
Yeah, I mean, I look at a variance as a little bit more of a precedent than anything else, but just my opinion on these things. But, yeah.
With the denser and smaller locations or smaller houses, will that bring lower value homes into that mix then too?
I don't know about lower value homes, it probably brings in more homes, but it's an incremental thing. I just don't want this conversation to be used against us 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road when the next development comes in saying, well, you did it for Mr. Tony Bigelow, you need to do it for me.
Yeah.
And that's always and that's paranoia in the back of my head. I don't know if I can ever think of that happening, but...
Even if we do it one way or the other, can the council override what
Yeah,
we...
yeah.
Yeah, it's
We're
just a
simply
recommendation.
Yeah, we're simply making a recommendation, so.
I mean, there's always the possibility the state's gonna override us anyway, right, so.
Yeah, 'cause that's still
The-
all on the table.
Yeah, I think it's still on the table where they're gonna try and override us, and then, you know, then 7,200 is way out the window, right? 'Cause they're gonna take it down to like 5,000 or something, I thought.
Pretty small.
Do you know what it is, Ian? What they're gonna try?
I tried looking at that, but I couldn't find an exact number before our meeting, but yeah, even if that's right, even if we do change it today, it's possible that we could be doing the same conversation again, once the state tells us we have to, so.
And I think to your point with the developer across the street, I don't think this, if we had made this change prior to them, they wouldn't be able to have made any difference, right? Because they were already pushing up against that 4 per acre, so they wouldn't be able to have shoved any more in there, so.
The good news is if that developer wants to file suit against the city, that goes to the city council, not.
Yeah, not to the,
So, I guess I would still be inclined to have the city's attorney cross a few Ts and dot a few Is on that at least, but that may be a little bit outside of my purview. So,
Something else to consider is that the Bigelow property has some issues.
Yeah.
Where the other one across the street does not. So maybe a variance to the lot size would be better, being that you can state findings of fact as
Because they have.
the easement and the wetland and the gas easement and all that. His property does have some things that other properties in town don't have.
yeah, this, is it, I don't know if it's 40 acres, is this 40 acres? Or whatever? 20 acres?
Well, all of Oscar Meadows was like originally 40 acres, but this piece of land specifically is 15.8.
Yeah, so he's got 15.8 acres or so, and like, there's a huge chunk of it he can't even use. It kinda makes you wonder if he would've done the whole thing in one go, it might have been easier for him to hit his numbers, but.
Yeah, well, I mean, when Mr. Bigelow was at the meeting, maybe it was the council meeting, but, I mean, he commented on that he's like already had to reduce the number of lots that he could get out of this land, like, pretty significantly. I wanna say, like, it was by at least a third, because of, like, all the easements and wetlands and the roadway, the 16th Street that he's going to be building all the way on the north edge. You know, that's another road that the city's making him build, and he's agreed to do, at his own expense, so. I mean, I think staff were recommending approval of the subdivision variance, feeling that it was justified in this instance because of everything else that's going on. And I would say everything that is affecting this property is not common compared to other properties that we've seen.
Do we have, and excuse my ignorance, as many years as I've been on the planning and zoning board, I should probably know this. Do we have a square footage requirement, you know, or percentage of lot requirement, that if we're lowering the lot size, is there other numbers that are gonna be affected potentially?
As far as like impervious surface area?
Yeah.
It's a percentage, so it shouldn't really affect this. It's just whatever percentage of your lot, so.
But there isn't, you know, if you have, you know, 7,200 square feet, you've gotta have a house that's 5,000 square feet. You know, the footprint has to be a certain size.
Yeah, well, so it's the percentage, so, 40% is for R1, so if you have 7,200 times,
So it's just so
40%.
the number doesn't change, it's just based on that percentage.
right, so, and that includes like all hard surfaces, so your driveway, the actual house, some people have sheds, decks, things like that, so. It adds up, and I do check, so, yeah.
That's kind of where I'm getting at that, so it's if Tony has, you know, a certain, you know, if we were to drop that to 72, does now all of a sudden his footprint on some of those lots not meet that 40%? Because now we just shrunk his lot and now his houses are too big? You know what I mean? I don't wanna, you know, I mean, if we vote on something and make a recommendation and now all of a sudden we made it worse.
No.
Yeah, we give him the small lot size, but now he's gotta make his houses smaller?
But now he's gotta make his houses smaller, you know?
Okay, I see. Let's see. He does have impervious listed here. So if we make 7,200 times 40% is 2,880 of impervious, which means, okay, so he's got like 2,495, looks like. So what he's planning to build would meet that 40% guideline. It just means that if people down the line are going to want to put in like sheds and decks and everything, they're going to be more limited in that way.
Mostly, what, they could only have 200 square feet of the shed.
Or
Is it
400 square feet of
400.
sheds and decks and...
It's up bigger now,
So, yeah, so
yeah.
we're essentially cutting 320 square feet of impervious out of the lot,
Yeah,
which is a lot when you start talking about decks and sheds and, you know.
yeah. Hmm.
So you'd almost, to give you the same square footage that you currently have, you'd almost have to be at 45%. You don't have to look at it.
Yeah, you did that math pretty
It's
well.
like 45% is like 3240 on the square footage.
Yeah,
40% 8,000 is 3,200, so.
yeah. I mean, in the older part of Casson, we have an R1A district, and then there you can do up to 45% impervious. I think that's just because a lot of those lots are smaller anyways. But maybe that's something else we could look at.
When you specify this impervious,
Yep.
what all does that, I understand decks, driveways. What about the guy on Manorville Avenue that turned his whole front yard into a gravel driveway? Does that change that equation?
Gravel is pervious, right?
Right, but you're not supposed to have, gravel driveways in
No.
city limits. New gravel driveways, I would say.
His whole front yard is.
I think he just expanded his driveway, it's not new.
Sounds like a complaint you may need to investigate, Ian.
Maybe if he paints it green.
I don't know. I mean, it's a bit of a coin flip anyway I look at it. I guess my gut's telling me to go with the subdivision variance today, but not necessarily, not entertain the conversation for a smaller lot size. I just think we need more than a single project to justify it, or more than just, hey, it fits here, but where else does it fit? And we're all kind of looking at each other going, I don't know. That doesn't mean the next meeting we might have 2 or 3 reasons to go to a smaller lot size.
But we're not there yet.
And I wouldn't disagree with you on that, Tom. I don't necessarily disagree with making the change to the 7,200. But I think there's just some other, because I think we would need to have a longer discussion and maybe get some of our contractors their feedback on that 40%, because that can be a big deal, and it's a big selling point, whether whether I can put a 10 by 10 shed and a 12 by 16 deck in my backyard, and now all of a sudden I'm short of my, of what we require,
Yeah.
that would be, because then we're just gonna flood ourselves with, now I need, variances for decks and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff,
Right.
which we don't want.
Yeah, we don't want that.
I would agree with Linda on the fact that we've got there's a lot of stuff going on in that lot that would give us the ammunition, so to speak, to give them the variance to, because all the stuff that's going on in that lot.
That's fair.
And it'll only be those 16 lots in Block 5.
I think ultimately, though, I wanna see this project go forward, right?
Oh, yeah,
Like,
I don't,
like, nobody else is gonna build 16th Street out for us.
No.
Right, especially in this area where it's hard to develop, so like, the problem is their variance request in is for a right-of-way, not for a lot size. So, right, if we choose not to do the lot size, change the ordinance, but we would rather them variance their lot size instead of the right-of-way, we're gonna have to ask them to come back with another request, right?
No, because we tabled the variance request.
I know, but we can't approve a lot size variance because we haven't had one applied to us. Because it sounds like that's kind of the way that Tom here would kind of prefer to go, is he'd rather do a lot size variance, which is not what we were asked to do, right?
no, whatever the variance that was submitted the last go-around, because forgive me, the paperwork's out in the car, I didn't bring it in with me, but the
Yeah,
variance
so,
specifically
yeah,
covered.
their subdivision variance request is for that right-of-way distance. So going down to 60 feet instead of 66 feet of right-of-way.
Yes.
For two streets, just these.
The two east-west streets, right?
Yep,
The sidewalk will get closer to the curb.
yes.
And that addressed all of the challenges at hand at the time, if I remember correctly.
All of the developers' challenges?
Yeah, at least that we're aware of, okay.
Yes.
So, yeah, I'm not trying to blow the whole, thing up at all. That was the original solution being proposed, and we just wanted to make sure, again, in my mind, that was the best solution. So,
In my opinion, the only issue or concern that I have with the right-of-way is the fact that we would make sure that it stays how they have it requested, with it coming off of the boulevard, not the streets.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I wouldn't want the streets cut
Right.
in size, because that creates an issue for the fire department, so.
Yep.
makes sense.
But, yeah, if we're just shortening the right-of-way from 8.5 feet to, 5.5 feet or 5 feet on each side, I don't have an issue or a concern with that. We still get our 5-foot sidewalks, we still get, everything else that we are requiring in all the rest of our subdivisions, we just got a little less boulevard.
If it's a whole development, to add to that point, everything's gonna line up, all the sidewalks are gonna line up, everything's gonna be clean, if it's a whole part, not butting up to another, so everything comes together on this one.
Yeah, we don't have stuff that just goes to nowhere.
Yeah, just shifts over,
Yeah.
little shift and everything. I would rather keep the streets the way they are, wide, or...
Any other questions, any other points to discuss? Well, I guess as it pertains to, 3A on our agenda here, referring to the minimum lot area, I would need a recommendation or proposal, please. Or a motion. Stick my nose into it, see if I can't make it sound relatively clean and simple and elegant. I would move that we deny the minimum lot area request as presented to us this evening as a part of public hearing 3A. Do we have a second?
Second that.
Motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
All is our one nay. Again, trying to be elegant, I would make a motion that we also deny the minimum right-of-way distance zoning amendment as presented to us on agenda item 3B this evening. Do we have a second?
Yep.
Motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That would be our recommendation there. And, moving on to number 4, the subdivision variance that we tabled last week, I would make the motion that we approve the subdivision variance as discussed this evening. Do we have a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
Motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? I guess that collectively would be our recommendation to the city council on the topic, Linda, if you can somehow type that up into an elegant presentation. Is there anything else anybody would like to discuss this evening? If not, I'll thank you all for showing up, and we'll adjourn the meeting. Take care.
Thank you.